I'm talking, you're listening. You're listening, and I'm talking. That's how this works. If you weren't listening and I was just talking, that wouldn't be a podcast so much as it would be a guy talking. If you were listening and I wasn't talking, you'd have nothing to listen to and we still wouldn't have a show. If you refuse to listen and I refuse to talk, then we don't have anything at all. If we come together, though, we are having a healthy dependence to help make the show happen. That's the only way that a podcast or any other type of program can possibly exist, is if we have a healthy dependence and reliance upon each other. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Today's recording found me, Dwight, and David Livingston together talking about the healthy role that dependence can play in healing and developing sobriety from opiate dependence. David has a lot of really interesting things to say about this and how a healthy vulnerability and healthy dependence can really play a role in becoming more healthy. So we're going to discuss that, and depending on how it goes, you might find yourself more healthy at the end or more dependent, but in a good way. Well, you'll see what I mean.
From my perspective, just to boil it down a little bit, ultimately needs drives everything. And that turns out to be, in some ways, simple, and in other ways, exceedingly complex. And so if you think about it in terms of needs, right? So if you begin with a baby, right? So you get a baby who's in distress, and their needs are pretty basic. They need to be held, changed, fed, played with, stimulated in some way. And, their needs at that point are really basic. And the attunement of the parent is to see, are they hungry? Do they need to be changed? Do they need to be held? Do they need to sleep? But they're pretty basic. And as we get older and go through stages, our needs become more diverse. So most of distress, though, has to do with people not getting their needs met. So if you look at a baby as kind of a template of that, what you'll see is people come in with anxiety, depression. And so if you begin to sort of figure out what is it that's not met, what need has been overlooked, what need is not happening, then what happens is, and you can articulate it and begin to help them understand what it is, which is always a need to be understood. So first need the baby has is to be seen. Can somebody actually see what I need? And once there's actually a treatment that starts to happen, there's a movement, you'll see the distress go down almost immediately when you can just articulate what the need is. And then you can begin to sort of parse as a beginning. That's how I approach it.
A baby in need is really one of the more abrasive sounds, if you will. I'm not calling the baby abrasive, the baby's cries. And in fact, we're evolved to feel that way when we hear a baby cry. We're supposed to be turned off by that enough that we want to do something to help, right? That's I think that's inborn.
Yeah. That's it.
It reminds me of a therapist I worked with a long time ago who would talk about that in terms of, he'd say that our emotions inside of us were often like a nursery of like newborn babies. And when we hear a cry over here, do they need something, just love and attention? Do they need something to eat? Do they need a diaper changed? Is there a discomfort? And how if you go to that baby and you write the situation, it seems, if you'd never seen a baby before, it would seem like a miracle. Worst noise in the world, worst crisis in the world, now it's fine. And if we have all these emotions inside us, they're like these little crying babies. If we feed them and we help them, I like the way you always put that it starts to feel better almost right away.
Right. One of our most basic needs is just understood and heard well. And when that happens, and I think this has a lot to do with people who struggle with, chemical dependency, that there are deficits and often, conflicts around what it means to have their dependency needs met. And culturally, I think we're such an independently oriented culture, and, independence matters. You have to grow up and be able to take responsibility and manage things on your own. So it's not binary, but the ability to have healthy dependency is essential to being a healthy and strong human being. And I think, So I think what happens is when someone feels really well seen and heard, and you can articulate that in a way, immediately they begin to relax and feel like, that need is getting met, and there's something therapeutic in that, immediately. So it's a starting place.
We never really get over the need for other people. But sometimes I think maybe a misinterpretation of what it means to be independent, I think that often sets us up for lots of negative experiences, because we then will invest in a kind of independence that is essentially unhealthy, where I should take care of everything myself. And I feel like that's very connected to the addiction model and the addictive or compulsive influences in our life, right? Is if no one's going to meet my needs, or if I have to meet all of them myself, or heaven forbid, if I really embrace both of those and that's internalized inside of me, then I'm going to go to whatever means I need to make sure that I don't hurt, or to make sure that I feel okay. And if I can't network well with other people for that, I'm going to manage it myself.
The four things that are present at the end of successful therapy is you have success at work, success in your relationships, you have the capacity to play, and you can accept your dependency needs, right? And if you think of the verbiage of that last, you can accept your dependency needs. It's a need, like hunger's a need, right? It doesn't disappear to speak to what you're saying. It doesn't disappear. It's an ongoing need in order to be healthy. We come out into the world with that need, and we leave the world with that need. And the people who can accomplish those four things have, I think, the potential for a happy and meaningful life. And it's basic in a sense, but it's also, once you get into the complexity of what it takes for those things, there's a lot that goes into it. But I like to sort of start with a template of what it might look like.
That's a real interesting four areas you say, and you brought this, talked a little bit about this before on some of our other shows, that work, relationships, a sense of play and pleasure, and then also accepting our dependency need. Each one of those is very deep in a way. In fact, that would be an interesting four ways any of us to measure our own health and say, how am I doing in those four areas? Because you think about that covers your career, it covers your family, covers relation with your children if you have any, or friendships, the kinds of things that make life enjoyable. It kind of feels to me like that last one is, in some ways, our dependency needs are kind of the glue for the other three in a way, aren't they?
I think that's it. It's the thing why people, I think, fear therapy a lot is that their dependency needs are so, it's a confusing place. One of the things that you'll see in therapy when it's going well is you'll see that there's a period where the therapist and the client are getting to know each other. And then you'll see at a certain point in time that there's a relaxation and that a lot of what's been in the background for the client starts to move to the foreground and get digested and understood. And you start to see a type of relaxation and relatedness. And that kind of sets the tone because it's playful. The relationship starts to take a different depth where you feel like you know each other in a different way. And so it begins to be a template for success at work because you have to be able to relate on multiple levels with people. To play, you have to be able to relate in different ways. And like you're saying, they all kind of are intertwined. Dependency needs, as you pointed out, is kind of the glue of all of them.
It's a big balancing act, isn't it? Because I'm just thinking of the therapy relationship in particular that you bring up. You want to have the independence of the person being able to take care of their needs, not being overly dependent on the therapy relationship or the therapist. But at the same time, you also want there to be vulnerability to say, I am here to get help. And I guess then on the other side of the room, so to speak, you've got the therapist who they're contributing what they're contributing independently with their own boundaries, but then to also be honest with the client to say, I can't actually help you or do these things for you, and I can do very little without your own expertise and investment in the process as the client. So, you've got this two-way balancing act of appreciating dependence needs and having those independent boundaries at the same time.
you put that really well. I see my work as kind of an art. Everybody's trying to solve it through science, and certainly there's merit to that, to look at things and see what's helping and what's not helping as much. So I understand that. But really, what you're doing is you're attuning, right? Sometimes people need to be reminded of their responsibilities and that they need to be able to handle things and confront it a little bit, so that and it firms them up in a way in which they actually feel and are reminded of their capacities and their responsibilities. And other times they need to let go. They need to feel like they can, at least for a little bit of time, come apart and be understood. And so it's this balancing act of letting go and then taking responsibility and that's indicative in the ability to play, the ability to be successful at work, and is that we can sort of move in and out. Like we can care and not care. We can take responsibility and we can let go and we can forget about things for a while. And so it really is an art and of this back and forth, like you're pointing out.
One of the pieces of research that I think about a lot as a therapist is the curative factors of therapy, and how they've found that the therapeutic relationship is the most important thing of whether or not you're going to be successful in therapy, kind of what you're talking about. And as that gets stronger, it's actually measurably more important than what the therapist does. And that makes a lot of sense now as you're talking about the psychological importance of this balance of vulnerability and independence. I keep thinking of it as vulnerability because to feel like I can let my guard down, I have to feel safe. And I think when you're dealing with dependence and addiction, there's so much that influences, where if I'm really going to tell you the way that my addictive tendencies rule the way I think and what I do, I need to have a pretty fair amount of trust to be able to be dependent on you honoring that trust, of us being able to work together.
Right. To talk about the areas in our lives in which we feel vulnerable, or to be able to put that forth is a vote of confidence and how that's handled, and the ability to give responses that are useful and caring and help the person feel more solid afterwards. All of that tends to create a greater level of trust when done well. And so, and then it, reinforces the feeling of dependency that's healthy, that actually strengthens us, right? So that the idea of dependency is that it makes us stronger. Same way going to school is supposed to make us smarter, right? It's the same idea.
What do you think are some of the big differences between an unhealthy sense of dependence and a healthy sense of dependence?
When we regress in a way in which we are expecting somebody to look after us, when we're an adult and we're acting in a way in which we're not taking responsibility. There's a difference between taking responsibility for ourselves and really, being courageous and trying to get stronger and better, and doing it through learning, through a sense of relying on someone who knows how to help us with that. And where there's a back and forth of being able to kind of regress in a way that is benign, right? It's sort of like taking a break and looking at things that are hard, and suspending our responsibilities and ourselves for a short period of time in order to kind of reorganize ourselves and move forward again differently, and as compared to a relationship where we're just expecting to be taken care of, right? That's a different mode. And while there's elements of it that you need to have for a period of time, it can't be the goal. The goal is to learn how to move back and forth, but ultimately know when we need to step forward and when it's time to take a break.
So just hearing you talk about the healthy dependence makes me think some of the actions of unhealthy dependence and some of the actions of healthy dependence are probably very similar. But one big difference that I'd see is, am I being vulnerable with the right people? Am I being dependent on the right people in the right way? Because if somebody's unsafe, I might learn bad lessons from that kind of interpersonal dependence.
No doubt. We have to be discerning. Many times especially when just meeting a new patient and so forth. They'll say, I don't trust you, or I don't trust therapy, or this or that. And maybe they've had bad experiences, or it could be that they're just meeting me for the first time. And one of the things I'll say is, you shouldn't trust me. My trust is earned and lost. And
Right.
so, it helps to keep an open mind so we can see and explore. But it's my job to be solid. It's my job to earn the trust. It shouldn't be given to me. And so it should be a slow process.
Well, because over-trust can be just as dangerous as under-trust. If I don't trust anybody, that's bad. But if I leap into unsafe relationships too quickly, that's also dangerous.
No doubt. No doubt. It's good not to trust, and it's good to stay open-minded. It's earned and lost.
When you see people who get really caught up into the real throes of an addiction, do you tend to see an undertrust, an overtrust, or just messy relationship with trust and dependence? What do you see come up usually?
I mean, first of all, you've got to get somebody out of, off of whatever the substance is, so that they're not, the chemistry and all of the effects of that aren't happening. But then further down the road, in my experience, what you'll see is confusion around how to regress and relax and play, when to not care, how to not care, and at the same time, when and how to take responsibility. So there's a lot of confusion. A lot of addiction has to do with a need for regression, a need to kind of not care and let go, but not knowing how to do it well.
That makes sense.
The ability, right? So that's where play comes into all of this, right? We can't. What's the Greek word? Agon. Agon means to be in the it means competition, or to be in the arena. It also means agony. So what happens is, in this world, to constantly in the arena and going, there's a type of agony. So part of addiction is this desire to get out of that, right? To take a break, to not care, to forget about things. That's where play comes into the first parts of what I was saying. So that's essential, but there's confusion because the adult part of us, the part of us that needs to build a life, have solid friends, be responsible, it can't come at the extent of what you built and who you want to be. So the idea is to be able to relax and play and forget about things in a way that doesn't jeopardize, your adult part, your responsibilities. And so, that's the art of that, of those two parts of it.
I often like to look at what is some of the underlying goals, and as you put it, the chance to escape from responsibility, or the chance to relax, or those kinds of things. The underlying goals often are really good, actually. It's a very healthy goal. And then what addiction comes into it, and dependence comes into it, when we are using something to get there that is long-term unhealthy or ineffective, actually, even, to where it becomes its own stressor. But it's like there's that old saying that addiction is thought to be a problem, but it's really a solution. And I know we talk a lot about that. And if you don't stabilize the underlying problem, then how would we get sober, right? And trying to look at it, the fact that oftentimes people are motivated by something healthy that they need, and then we end up doing something unhealthy to try to get that. But then we forget, as we're trying to treat the unhealthy part, that what we were trying to do in the first place was actually probably pretty healthy.
Well, right, that the need in addiction is a real need. The need to be able to let go and forget about things and all kinds of things, right? It's different in how it goes with, what drives each person's needs specifically. But it's not the right way to do it. It's unsustainable. Ultimately, it leads to more problems and dangers. So it's not the right way. It's not the right way to meet the need, right? It'd be like eating a box of candy every day for nutrition. It's just not going to get you there.
But nutrition is good, right? See, so yeah, there's the underlying need of eating, which we do need to do, and then we're not getting the nutrition, even though we're doing a thing. And it would be, you're right. It would be like if someone said, "Hey, just knock off a all that candy and you're fine. But that person doesn't, in this analogy, doesn't know what to eat yet. So, yeah, exactly. So that leaves us without a box of candy. In other words, I'm still hungry, but I have nothing to eat now, or I'm back to my own devices. And so it's like learning, what do I eat, or whatever the version is of that.
That's right. That ultimately, a lot of people getting better is creative. They have to discover and find other ways to get the needs met. Find other foods that they like to eat that are nutritious, that they can enjoy. I mean, is a simple solution, but the reason addiction continues is because needs continue, right? Our need to eat is going to go on forever. So the question is, how are we addressing it? So, that's why I like to start with those four ideas because those sort of cover our basic needs, both as adults and the more child part of ourselves. So the child and the adult in us is there forever, right? And how do we operate with those aspects of ourselves that, so that they're not in conflict, so that we can be a grown up and handle things and take care of responsibilities and make our way in the world when we need to. And we can also let go and forget about things and feel some joy and relaxation. So we're not in the arena all the time.
It's a real interesting when you have the arena and the agony part going on there. It's a lot of times you see everybody struggle with this idea of how do I, make it through the world, especially right now, things feel kind of crazy. And I've noticed, see it on social media and stuff. People, they start to even use the word adult as a verb. I'm sure you see that, right? Where they're like, well, I just don't feel like I can adult today, or I think I'm done adulting for today. And I think that gives us kind of a feel, some of these expressions and the way we talk, it's kind of like taking society's pulse in a way, and to say, boy, we're all feeling a little overwhelmed here, aren't we? There's a lot of this in the arena kind of agony feeling that is propelling just a lot of stress. And, to be honest, sometimes I look at some of these things when people are looking down upon someone with addiction problems and things. First, I think, well, how could we not have, more? It seems like we ought to have more problems like that because of the stress in society. And then I also then look at it and say, but actually, we do have a lot of those. It's just that some of the ways that we handle them aren't unhealthy enough that they put our life at risk, or they don't happen to be illegal, or those types of things, or they don't have a stigma attached to them as much, but we still do them compulsively. So it's a dynamic that everybody faces.
There's no doubt that really the difference between a healthy, active, creative life and one that's narrowed by addiction is just, the degree to which we're overly invested in one way of doing things rather than sort of creatively figuring out how to get our needs met in multiple ways. And, it's so, yeah. So what you're saying, I think, makes a lot of sense. Spread it around, get your needs met in many ways, and that's, ultimately being able to be more creative, like figuring things out. And that should be a big part of what therapy is having someone who can sit there and you've got a space. That's kind of what the benign regression is about. Like, oh, you're doing it this way, but okay, yeah, so here's what you need. You want to forget about things. You're tired of being an adult for now. But, why not take a walk? Oh, yeah, I love taking walks. I love going for hikes. When's the last time you did that? It's been 6 months. Well, how come you're not doing that twice a week? You're right. I should do it, right? And then you get into the reasons people don't. And it actually gets interesting because people don't feel deserving of it. They don't even think of it. And right, so all of a sudden you have this process of kind of working that through so that you start to have behaviors. You have insights and behaviors that support one another. And really, from my perspective, That's where these two schools of psychology really need to be, is unless people really understand what they're needing and can see it, and then have behaviors that reinforce it, that's when things tend to get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that I've often noticed that we don't do healthy things, and the reasons we usually list are I got too busy, or I have too many responsibilities, or I had to do this for someone else, or I had to do this for my job or whatever. And the interesting thing is that when we go to unhealthy ways to meet those needs, they end up interfering with all of those things a lot more. Our relationships, our job, our family, our responsibilities, they get interfered with much more once we have an addictive problem. But we don't think of it that way. And I think one of the reasons is because addictive practices don't take, at least they don't feel like they take as much time. They do actually take a lot of time and effort to maintain. And I'm often but almost kind of impressed by the smarts and the efforts that it takes and the energy it takes to maintain an addiction, actually, when you look at that. But it is sort of immediately reinforcing, it's distracting. And I think in some ways, one of the main parts is it's secret. And so I don't have to tell everyone, hey, I need 20 minutes right now. I'm going to go get high, right? I don't say that because getting high is my secret, right? But if I was to say, hey, I need 20, 30 minutes, I'm going for a walk. And if anybody goes like, oh boy, you really can't help me right now. And if I know that I'm going to say, you're right, I'll do a walk later, let me just help you, because I'm embarrassed to stand up for that need. But I can go disappear for 20 minutes. And everybody's like, where are you? Where are you? And it's like, I'm back, and now I feel different. And
absolutely, it's easier in some ways.
At least it seems easier for a minute. I think that sometimes when we think about living a healthy life, we tend to think about throwing the good out with the bad. We don't have a strengths-based kind of thought process sometimes to say, if what I needed was to check out of stress and to relax, for example, people usually look at it and say, oh man, you did these terrible things to try to get that. And so then I just try to give up on my need to relax and to unplug, and say I just need to be more responsible somehow and double down on not relaxing. I think there's that danger sometimes of people trying to get rid of their needs as they're trying to get rid of their addiction.
That's why I started it out with saying that needs drive everything. Like you're saying, you can't get rid of needs. What you have to do is understand what the needs are, and then you find creative ways to get them met so they're not getting, limited into this intense space of an addiction that doesn't really meet the needs in the way that you need.
Yeah, and I think that's the power of trying to understand why we do what we do, right? Is to say, if I'm doing this in order to meet this need is probably important to me. If I'm willing to, on some level, even subconsciously, go to this great extent of maybe even learning what I need to do to get high, procuring whatever drugs I need, maintaining relationships and finding finances and all of the stuff, evading legal detection or trying to, all of those steps that go into, opiate dependence. If I'm doing all those things, I probably really do need what I'm pursuing. And so there's some part of me that's trying to get something that is probably very legitimate. And so if I can stabilize the addictive part, it's still very important, even maybe more important, to find healthy ways to do that, or else I'm just going to find myself right back in the throes of the addiction later on.
Right. So just to kind of add to what you're saying, because that's exactly right. So, I can't tell you how many people I've met with who are successful, have built a good life, then something happens and they end up on opioids. So they're immensely responsibility driven, but they can't get off the opioid because when they get on it, finally they start to get a break. They feel better.
Yeah.
They start to relax. The nervous system feels better. But the rub is when you start to think about their life, their success and what they've built has all been based on the idea that they will take responsibility. So their addiction is secret. They feel ashamed about it because it's one way they don't feel like they are. Okay. But there's a need to relax, to let go, to feel good, to have some commensurate benefit to all the responsibility. So that there's a balance there, and initially the opiate helps that balance, and then it worsens it. But the interesting part of the treatment is how much they will cling to the need to not give up any responsibility. They will act as if the whole world revolves around their need to be on top of everything. And eventually what happens is, as they let go, as they do less, as they bring other people in to help them, they find out that what they thought was true is not nearly as true as they thought. So, there's the things that have worked for us, we hold on to so dearly. So that, to me, that's kind of where the therapy happens. And it's different with everyone, right? Different strengths and places in life.
The Wiseman Method podcast is a product of Wiseman Method Treatment Specialists. You can follow us on Twitter @opiates or learn more about us at opiates.com. Shoot us an email at info@opiates.com as well. Please consider giving us a cool review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our music is Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. This show is edited and produced by Popped Collar Productions, which is a company specializing in helping healthcare, nonprofits, and others to find creative solutions through podcasting. You can learn more about our production services at poppedcollar.net. Thanks for joining David Livingston and me today. Next episode, Claire, David, and I are going to join to discuss what family members can do to help those that are struggling with addiction. Keep asking questions. Whenever you ask questions, you're liable to find answers, and if you can find answers, you can find some hope. Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye for now.